So today we are here because, and it's really an honor to have you here, Pat, because it's not very often that we do things in our lives that live on long after we've been actively involved in them. And when I think about the godmother of the Lemonade Concert and Art Fair, and we just celebrated the 41st Concert and Art Fair just this past June. Talk about that inspiration of that and the format of the event that goes all the way back to 1974.
Sure. The original idea was probably the result of some brainstorming that we did because I had a graduate assistant, and her name was Mary Miller, and her father worked for the Minnesota Orchestra. So I had gotten acquainted with him, and therefore some people at the Minnesota Orchestra organization, and Mary and I decided that it would be just a wonderful thing if we could get the Minnesota Orchestra to perform outside on the new mall at St. Cloud State University. And it would be a totally free, come one, come all, grandma to babies. People could come and sit on a blanket. It would be picnic style, so none of the sort of scary parts of symphony. And we had as a motive, we wanted to introduce people to that kind of experience, the love of music without any of the intimidation of, oh, I can't clap between the movements, that sort of thing. So we began working with the orchestra organization to put something like that together. And as that evolved, we also began to work with a few people in the community, including Arlene Helgesen, who was heavily involved with the Arts Council.
Yeah, we really miss her. She's passed away a couple of years ago, but she was truly one of those pillars of the community who really strongly supported and believed in the arts.
She sure did. And she was a great supporter of St. Cloud State as well. So we definitely had some interests that coincided, and she was going to help us secure some funding. And along the way, we decided that we would like to expand the event a little bit and perhaps have some artists on hand. So we were thinking of an art fair. Art fairs were just really beginning to boom in those days. And I think we probably had visions of grandeur, like, oh, maybe it'll be the Uptown in a few years.
Which is a large Minneapolis
institution
out of the Edina area, correct?
It's in Uptown.
Yep. Uptown area.
Right in Uptown in Minneapolis. So anyway, we got together and started talking about some potential dates and adding some artists, and realized that we were going to be either directly coinciding with or really close to an art sale event that the Community Arts Council had planned. They called it Art in the Park, so it was an outdoor event as well. And through Arlene, because of her connection with both, it was decided that it might very well benefit both of us if we put our events together.
Oh, what a great idea.
Yep. And, after getting past the idea that, some people are afraid they won't be able to find a place to park on campus, and assuring them it's summer, it'll be fine. We actually did arrive at a date and decided that instead of going out after our own list of artists, we would combine our efforts with the local arts council to get the artists in. We did then add a few traveling musicians, that could do some things in the few hours right before. After we set up the artists, we would have a few traveling musicians and maybe a mime, that sort of thing. So it could be quite an outdoor arts event.
And if I remember correctly, it's always been free to the public, correct?
Absolutely. That was very important.
It was really part of that mission, that vision of reaching out to the greater community.
Absolutely.
And never have anyone say, we cannot afford to go to this event because my family, with Grandma and Grandpa, it's 7 people. No, free always.
Free always. And we came up with the name in an unusual way as well.
Please talk about that because people always ask, Why lemons?
What does
Why
it have to
lemonade?
do with lemonade, right?
What does it have to do with that?
Well, we were trying to think of what to call it. And at the time, well, they still do, the Minnesota Orchestra still does coffee concerts. And they're usually held in the morning, and they are concerts that are arranged so that students can come and, parents with small children, that sort of thing. And for a while, they were actually taking the seats away, and people could sit on the floor for those concerts. That was in a facility prior to the current orchestra hall. But we decided, all right, coffee concert, something along that line. We wanted it to be that kind of an atmosphere where it was really pretty relaxed and inviting. Well, what do you drink in the middle of a summer afternoon? Lemonade. Not even sure whose idea it was, but it came out of a brainstorming session, and there it was.
And it stayed. It's never gone away. And now we have vendors that actually squeeze fresh lemonade. And I think of their hands at the end of the day just have to be numb from all the lemonade that they put together.
And they did that the very first year, too. The food service people in Atwood put together real lemonade from real lemons.
So when you started beginning this connection with the city of St. Cloud, did you all think that this would live on, that this would become an annual event? Did you start planning it with that idea in mind right away?
Oh, I think a little bit. I think we thought that we might do it more than once. I'm certainly not going to say we believed it would be going on for 40 years. No, we did not see that. But I think we did hope that we might be able to do it more than once. And always that was dependent on being able to get funding.
So the expense of hiring world-renowned Minnesota Orchestra, Pat, must have taken not only that fundraising aspect of your job, but probably also some grant writing?
It did. So not things that I originally thought I'd be doing, but it was pretty good training ground.
Because you had just started here, about 5 years prior to 74.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, as a new professional, kind of just getting into the field, all of a sudden you're at this level of... this is a big event.
Go out and raise some money and write some grants, Pat. So we did it, and I do have to credit my graduate assistant at the time, and I've mentioned her, Mary Miller, and getting a little help from some of the folks at the orchestra office, the person who was in charge of their education division, who was a little bit more familiar with grant writing. So she tipped us off to a few places that we could try for grants. But the fundraising really had to be local because it's a local event. You need your local sponsors. And the grants were dependent on us getting some sponsorship. Now, we always had 3 sources of funding for the event. There was some money that was always allocated through the activities allocation process.
So through student activity fees.
Yep. So the students have always supported the event. And then we solicited, I remember we got some of our earliest sponsors included Gopher Lumber and Supply.
That still is here today in St. Cloud.
Yes, it is. DeZurich's, they were the sponsors. Trying to remember who else. We could probably look at some of the early posters, but some of those remained annual sponsors every year, and not necessarily really large amounts, but faithful. So once we had secured a few of those, then the grants did come in, and we were able to support that for many, many years. And of course, Margaret, because after I left the activities world at St. Cloud State and you took over, you were still doing it. So we continued to, and as the orchestra costs went up. So
yeah, and I think that's the greatest lesson probably of anyone who's out there starting an event for the first time is, if you had to give some words of advice, would you say to tenacity, not
persistence.
persistence.
Tenacity, something along that line is usually exactly what works. You just keep knocking on the doors with a big old smile on your face.
and also, I think, finding some right people who believe the same as you, who see that vision goal of culture to the greater St. Cloud area.
And I'm amazed when I think back at how quickly it became a big event. The first year, we had really no expectations. We just hoped that there would be a lot of people that showed up. And they did, I think we got, as I recall, we figured it was somewhere over 1,000 people showed up. We just thought, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Well, the next year, it was more like, I think the newspaper said there were 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people that would show up for this event in the next few years. And it really did become huge. And days before the event, people would start calling the press, saying, what does the weather look like for the event?
Because weather, definitely. And was it always in July? The first few years?
I think I think we actually had an early August date one year. Our theory was we tried to find the week, we tried to follow the week that they were going to do Aquatennial, because supposedly they had done some scientific method of choosing that date so it would be the most apt to be pleasant, dry weather. So we followed their lead a couple of times, but it didn't always work.
No. And so from the very beginning, though, weather is a concern because it is an outdoor. And did you plan at the very beginning to have it be rain or shine outside?
No. It could never be rain or shine outside, at least the orchestra performance, because, of course, I doubt that they brought their Stradivariuses to play outside, but the instruments they have are really, really valuable, and they will not play outside.
But did you also provide
an indoor
venue for the artist?
Yes.
Which is very unique. Which is very unique.
Yep.
And so you were able to, was it down in Hellenbeck that became that backup rain site? But Ritchie Auditorium, as we know it today, was for the orchestra to perform, or did everything
moved to Hellenbeck? Yep, which is, well, it's been a concert facility in the past, not the best. But it worked.
So really that probably evolved and was that backup until the artist exceeded the space that would be possible for a rain.
Yes.
Because I think today they say that they've settled around 200 to 250 artists, but there was a point in time where it was up as high as 350.
That's amazing.
So starting with a few and then just growing. And as you say, it's surprising how quickly it caught on for this university. And for St. Cloud, as this is the day to come together on the campus of St. Cloud State University.
Right. And with regard to the whole rain thing, well, first of all, on the day of the event, my husband would not be particularly excited about this, but I swear I'd get a call at 6:45 in the morning from the radio station. Is it an indoor or outdoor event? And I'd be kind of like, well, I'm going to look outside, I don't know yet. And on a couple of occasions, the orchestra set up in two places. Now, this is sort of unprecedented. They would arrive sometime early in the day with their big old semi, and they had a manager, a stage manager, road manager, who was here every year, and he was such a good guy, and he became one of my best friends, I'll tell you. And twice he set up in two places, and he always said, "Don't you tell anybody I'm doing this for you, little lady." Because he wasn't.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. But I do remember at least one time when they were set up in two places, and at showtime, the rain was coming down in sheets. And it was a darn good thing they had. So we never missed a show, but we did get
But
moved
your
down.
goal would be always to be outdoors.
Yes.
And that's why you would have the two venues, is because you would hope that those clouds would drop and fall
and they
off.
did a few times, didn't
Yes,
they? I
did.
mean, you know, too.
Yes, they did. Talk a little bit, Pat, about, and I think you've kind of touched on this, but I really want you to go a little bit further about that TownGown connection.
Yes.
Because prior to 1974, the university probably was this place that most of the community would avoid because we had things like one-way streets. We had parking lots that were always full.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you broke that kind of perception that people had about the campus. And so talk about that relationship with the city and how that really has developed well through, again, the 41 years.
Well, as I said, it just became such a big event, and people began to look forward to it throughout the community. And I would say the broader community, you know, not just the confines of the St. Cloud city limits, you know. And more artists would come, and we would actually have people contacting us year-round to see if they could get involved with it, and that included some of the musical artists, people who were wanting to come. Some of the people who would come and play in our coffee house, for example, would say, well, you know, I could show up and do something midday if you want me. So the event took on a bit of a life of its own. Then, as the city began to put together an idea to do a festival, they were putting together an idea that they called for a number of years the Wheels, Wings, and Water Festival. I actually made a contact with some of the folks and said, we're both looking at events that might draw a big crowd. What if we get our events together? You know, what if we connected the Lemonade concert to your festival? And my ulterior motive was that this might help to ensure the funding for the organization going down the road. That was always a challenge. And the cost of the orchestra was going up, and it needed to. I mean, that just is the way things were and are. But it occurred to me that might help us out. And at one meeting, they were discussing what kind of events would be good to include. And some people, we don't want to do a orchestra event. How about a ball game? You know, and I actually didn't have to say it. Several other people at the event said, well, the Lemonade concert draws the largest crowd for any event in St. Cloud except the 4th of July fireworks display. And it did.
And think about that, Pat, because you're talking probably about 1978, 79 that you're having this conversation. So you've only really been into it 5 years.
Right.
And already it has, as you say, been up into that 4,000 or 5,000. And for the members of the city to recognize that and to say, no, this has... this is a...
We want
this. This is what we would look to as what we would call an anchor event, because it would kick off our weekend full of baseball games, log rolling, or speedboat races.
And it was a perfect kickoff, just perfect. And our event always had to be on a weekday, and we had settled on Thursdays. Why is that? Why because of the orchestra's availability.
So they would be booked at Orchestra Hall on weekends. But,
and Summerfest, Zoomerfest, during the summer. Yeah, they were not available to us on a weekend.
So it was that combination of the orchestra's availability on a Thursday, the campus probably community to have everyone available
that was big.
To be able to host this event.
Oh, that actually was huge. Yeah, because every other, weekends during the summer, would be hard to get a crew. And the whole campus, too, was very supportive. I remember being given on the days of that event, and you probably remember this, too. That's the day when we'd get that key that opened everything on campus, that big master key, every door.
Just in case.
Yep, just in case. Yep, I remember teasing the president, saying, I have a key to your office today. He was okay with that.
So the festival then said with welcome, open arms.
Yep.
And to this day, it still remains a part of the City Festival. And the City Festival has changed from Wheels,
Right.
Wings, and Water to now Granite City Days. But it still remains that kickoff event
It sure
for
does.
the weekend.
Yep, that's just, as the festival evolved, that was an anchor.
Pat, do you want to... my guess is when you think back to those beginning years, it was volunteers that you relied on to help
Absolutely.
set up the art fair, help set up the chairs, the events. So volunteers has always been an important part
You bet.
of programming. How did you find people?
Well, the students, primarily the students who were involved in first ABOG and then the University Program Board,
And ABOG
was the
Atwood
Board of Governors. Yeah,
Okay.
and it was really the program organization, so like a student activities board.
Okay.
We would be out there shortly after, by 7 in the morning, we would be out there with chalk. I'd have a chart and a little herd of students running around with chalking numbers on the sidewalk for the artists. I know that it's a lot more sophisticated now, but those were the days. We couldn't do it the day before because it might rain.
Is that crazy? So I think now Jessica Osman would say it takes about a week of marking out all the stalls, and they do use a special kind of tape that does not go away with a rainstorm, and yet can easily be peeled up after the sun has been on it for a week and people stepped on it. So the day of, you're marking out. And did the art fair begin at 11?
It usually did, yeah.
So
with
do all
artists in
that.
the parking lots by 7:15. So yep. But we just said, well, you can't come until
We're done.
We're done with the numbering. And remember, those days we didn't have 350. It was more like I think we had around 100 at that point.
Yes, and it was a very dedicated 100
Oh,
in
yeah.
some respects, because didn't you have some folks that every year this was their art fair?
Yep, we did. And, we had some discussions along the way, too, as to whether or not we were going to jury it. And that, there were pros and cons.
And when you say juried, what does that mean?
That means that artists would actually have to apply to be in the show, and that we could set some kind of criteria regarding what could be sold. And we did set some. We said no greenware, no people couldn't bring garage sale stuff, that sort of thing. It had to be handmade, original creations. And
So
we
a
kept
standard.
it pretty. We set some standards. We never did go to the jurying, and jurying would mean that every artist would have to submit some examples or photographs of work, and then you decide yes or no. But we simply asked them to follow the standards, and if somebody showed up and they weren't, then they were not invited back.
So that was the way to deal with it, is
Yeah, it
that
was
you,
pretty-
you walked around then that day, you and the committee, the others, and you would talk and look and go, boy, this person is extraordinary. Definitely
You bet.
make sure this person comes back. But, this one did not quite meet the standard that we were looking for.
Right.
And it's amazing. It's still not that what we call juried,
Right.
but it still has a standard.
Criteria,
And we have a array of watercolorists that will come, as well as people doing sculptures out of metalworks, as well as,
Trisco.
Bob Trisco, who I believe was maybe at the first
He
one.
was. Yep, he's been there every year.
So 41 years, Bob Trisco, who travels all over the United States, probably even the world, with
Absolutely.
his jewelry.
He does.
This is his home, and we certainly appreciate his
Absolutely.
dedication to lemonade. Pat, if you, we look ahead here with not too far away, the 50th Lemonade concert and art fair. I know.
How did it get older? I didn't.
You didn't. You probably started working on this event when you were 12.
Yep.
But if money was not an object, and if we didn't have to worry about sponsorships and writing those grants, what would you envision the day or program to be like on that 50th?
Oh, well, of course the Minnesota Orchestra would be back. But that is not because I feel that the St. Cloud Symphony is not a fantastic centerpiece of that. They have.
I think the last 15 years has been the St. Cloud Symphony Orchestra.
Yes. And, when it obviously became too expensive to bring in the Minnesota Orchestra any longer, by that time, the St. Cloud Symphony had reached a level of performance that, in my mind, and I was no longer involved with it, I think you were when that transition was made, that was an absolutely no-brainer, of course. And things like bringing the Minnesota Orchestra to the community, I think, did help encourage, the evolution of our local organization to the level that it is now. When you have that kind of support for symphony music, and in the broad sense, then it really makes a difference in the communities. And I'm still involved with Minnesota Orchestra in many ways, and I still pitch that all the time. Say, if you really want to be audience building, you need to be building it out state. You need to be looking at how. Otherwise, it's shrinking. If you look at your subscription audiences, and they're gray. we need this kind of event for all of the arts to make sure that people know its value and grow to love it, and that's how that happens. And that inspires things like the community orchestras to do as much as they have. So the St. Cloud Symphony Orchestra has been a very, very fine centerpiece for that organization. The reason I'd want to see the Minnesota Orchestra back is just because it's a 50-year thing and they launched it, and it would be a really, really wonderful token, I think.
Yeah,
although we won't get them for a token, I know that.
We maybe have to start fundraising tomorrow.
Well, exactly. And who would maybe even come back would be Henry Charles Smith, because he did most of the, remember he did so many of those concerts, and I'm a part of an organization now called its acronym is YPSCA. It's the Young People's Concert Program through the Minnesota Orchestra. We bring the busloads of kids in for concerts down there and raise money to do that. And Henry Charles Smith was very involved in that as well and is a part of that organization. So he's retired, but still going strong. And once in a while when I see him, we talk about those events and what that meant to everybody.
Yeah, I think that idea really just starts first as having that conversation about what would it take for us to be talking about something, Pat, that began really as an idea, probably 42, maybe 43 years ago, okay?
Yeah.
Well, what would happen if and let's see if we can, and today is truly, we call it one of our signature events. Lemonade Concert and Art Fair is one of the largest one-day art fairs in the upper Midwest.
Wow.
Because most art fairs are 2 days or 3 days.
Yeah, that's
or
right.
4 days.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We are committed to one day for a variety of reasons, but when you talk to the artists, they say it works. It really works. When you look back to that vision and mission of open and free to all ages, 1974, we did not have a St. Cloud Symphony Orchestra. When I talk to members of the Symphony Orchestra, they do point to the Minnesota Orchestra on the mall performing for all. It did kind of motivate the people of our community to say we should, and they started dreaming.
Sure. And we have the talent around here.
Yes,
so
we do.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, and as you say, they have been stable for us for probably about last 15 years and are always going to be a partner here for us. Pat, it's just been delightful to talk with you about the Lemonade Concert and Art Fair. Any parting words?
Oh, well, let's see.
Yeah.
You ask what else about a 50th. Definitely they should do the 1812, with canon. I mean, that was always done by the Minnesota Orchestra,
Yes.
and the kids would love it. I can remember my own children, pointing out to them, look back there, the guy's going to shoot that gun. It's an instrument for a change in the musical ensemble here. It's an orchestra instrument, and everybody would think that was just so fun. But yeah, I was always exhausted when it was over, and glad it was over. And I would worry for weeks before about the weather, watching every weather report I could find. So I was kind of glad the first couple of years that I didn't do it, that it wasn't me, and I'd think about you. But
and you didn't have Bob Weissman back in those first few years.
Well, we did have. There was a guy we called Nistler. He was my friend, and then you called him too. I know you did.
From the Weather Service.
Exactly. And he knew we were going to be calling. Yeah. And he'd give me his best bet. But, even though it was a lot of work, I would do every bit of it again. Oh. Every bit. Wow. So
thank
Pat. You. We done?